Apollo 1 has gone up in flames. 3 astronauts die in the inferno. NASA is set back in its race to the moon, as there is a scramble to not only determine where the fault lies, but also in how to move forward. With the blessing of President Lyndon B. Johnson, NASA immediately launches its own internal investigation. They impound and disassemble what's left of the Apollo 1 craft. They release the final results on April 5, 1967. Grissom, White, and Chaffee all suffered third-degree burns over parts of their bodies, but asphyxiation caused in the incendiary environment killed them first. 5 major factors in the spacecraft design and procedure turned it into a death trap. The pure oxygen in a high-pressure environment was hazardous. There were flammable materials in the cabin. The hatch cover and its 3 levels could not be removed quickly in a high-pressure environment. The emergency procedures were not well established. Finally, an ignition source in either the plumbing or exposed electrical wiring caused the fire to begin in the first place. NASA will also face a Senate investigation. It is dark times for American space travel as they try to move forward and travel amongst the stars.
As the technology of man in space was developing, it became more and more apparent that our knowledge of the moon's surface as a possible landing site was not sufficient. To land man safely on the moon and get him safely off again, we had to know whether we could set up a precise enough trajectory to reach the moon. Could we design and build a spacecraft to land gently on the moon? Among all those lunar craters, could we find a place clear and level enough for a safe landing site? Much more has been done. The doing wasn't easy. The plans didn't always work. But when they did, they took us beyond the dreams of the 50s to a point where, within 20 years of Hoyle's modest wish, 2 Americans will actually land on the surface of the moon. In the meantime, there will be more great pictures like this now famous photograph. When this happens, Hoyle predicted, when we can leave Earth with a camera and move out into space, it is certain to make marked changes in our whole outlook on life.
Some suspect the Apollo 1 failure falls on the shoulders of contractor North American Aviation, while others blame NASA for rushing the program to reach the moon before the late President John F. Kennedy's end-of-decade deadline. What the Senate Committee on Aeronautical and Space Sciences uncovers in the course of their investigation is the Phillips Report. an assessment of North American aviation's work on the Apollo program from 1965, headed by Apollo Director Lieutenant General Samuel C. Phillips. Phillips' findings, clearly linked to North American aviation, is that the contractor is overstaffed, disorganized, and not working in unison for a cohesiveness in developing the Apollo capsule. Most importantly, the work on the capsule is not up to snuff. In a letter to North American Aviation, the NASA Associate Administrator writes,
I had hoped that a letter such as this would not be necessary. However, I consider the present situation to be intolerable and can only conclude that drastic action is in the best national interest. I assure you that I have only one purpose, and that is to carry out the Apollo program on schedule and within planned costs.
In spite of all this, and with all concerns noted, the Senate arrives at their conclusion on January 30th, 1968.
As far as the spacecraft is concerned, it's been, we thought we had it pretty well checked out when it left Los Angeles. And we've run into some problems in the environmental control system, which have just been corrected, and we'll start back with the altitude chamber test the first of the year at the Cape. I guess the biggest thing that's happened to us since that time was a change of the backup crew. As you know, they've just been introduced with Wally and Don and Walt. This has caused us some little problem in that they were somewhat behind us in training, so they've been scrambling pretty hard to get caught up.
NASA has been testing Apollo in unmanned flights and rocket tests until the time that Apollo 1 replacement crew will get their chance to fly the Apollo capsule into space. In the midst of NASA's juggling of the Apollo program, in order to make it safer and better operational, they decide to retroactively rename the unmanned Saturn 1B rocket test flights to Apollo 2 and Apollo 3. Apollo 4 through 6 will also be unmanned launches. The first actual manned Apollo flight mission will be designated Apollo 7. But in the meantime, the Saturn rockets will be tested at that site, especially built years earlier for them, at the John F. Kennedy Space Center, a fitting tribute to the late president who inspired the country to look to the moon. Since the Saturn V stands at a whopping 363 feet, it requires a facility with an area and emplacements adequate to handle its power. NASA settled on Merritt Island for a site. Just north to northwest of Cape Canaveral, construction began in 1962. Originally dubbed the Launch Operations Center, it is rechristened on November 29, 1963, a week after Kennedy's assassination in Dallas, Texas. In December 1964, launch elements from Houston Space Center are transferred to JFK. The Space Center covers a length of 34 miles and a width of 6 miles. The overall square mileage is 219. Since the Saturn V is so titanic, the vehicle assembly building required to construct it is 525 feet tall and 716 feet long by 518 feet wide. November 9, 1967, 7 a.m. Apollo 4 is the first full test of the three-stage Saturn V rocket. Loaded with an Apollo command and service module concealed within the rocket, Apollo 4 will not only test the launch procedures, but also will bring back pictures of the Earth. courtesy of the command module's automatic camera. The Saturn V is so powerful that it shakes buildings miles away upon launch. As the Apollo 4 orbits the Earth twice, Mission Control tests its ability to fire its boosters at different points. This will be crucial for when the Apollo flights need the required boosts to get both in and out of lunar orbit. The Apollo 4 command module lands 8.5 hours later. The test is a success. January 22nd, 1968, 5:48 p.m. Apollo 5 is the first test with a lunar module designed to also simulate a landing abort, where the ascent stage fires upward while the descent stage is still attached. Using a smaller version of the Saturn V rocket, the Saturn 1B, this test will take Apollo 5 into orbit and perform the tests meant for the lunar surface there. The flight software malfunctions and prevents Mission Control from testing the descent propulsion system. But, all that aside, the test is considered still a success. March 31st, 1968. As NASA continues to push forward with Apollo amidst the social issues and racial tensions in America, President Johnson delivers a blow that some see as crushing to American morale.
What we won when all of our people united just must not now be lost in suspicion and distrust and selfishness and politics among any of our people. And believing this as I do, I have concluded that I should not permit the presidency to become involved in the partisan divisions that are developing in this political year. With American sons in the field far away, with America's future under challenge right here at home, with our hopes and the world's hopes for peace and the balance every day, I do not believe that I should devote an hour or a day of my time to any personal partisan causes or to any duties other than the awesome duties of this office, the presidency of your country. Accordingly, I shall not seek and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
Whomever takes the office after his departure, it is that administration's stance on space travel that will seriously affect NASA and the future of space travel. April 4th, 1968, 7 a.m. The Apollo 6, which contains all three modules, the command, the service, and the lunar module, will be the final unmanned flight. Only 2 minutes into the flight, what are known as pogo oscillations strike, and this causes the rocket to vibrate. Structural panels, due to a manufacturing flaw, come loose from the lunar module's adapter. Into the second stage firing of the thrusters, 2 engines prematurely shut down. The third stage also fails to fire. Despite these problems, the Apollo 6 touches down in the ocean at 5:23 p.m. The pogo oscillations will be remedied by a helium system that will absorb the shock in time for Apollo's manned flights. These achievements go mostly unheeded by much of America, for a great tragedy occurs shortly after Apollo 6 splashes down. April 4th, 1968, 6:01 p.m. Later that day, and mere hours before Apollo 6's return to Earth, American morale is dealt another blow when civil rights activist Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is shot and killed by a white man, James Earl Ray. Riots erupt in over 100 American cities in both protest and grief. October 11th, 1968, 11:02 a.m. It has been 2 years since NASA sent a man into space. The crew of Apollo 7, Wally Schirra, Don Eisel, and Walter Cunningham, are likely thinking of their fallen comrades as they climb into their own module. They are picking up the job intended for Grissom and his 2 pilots. Apollo 7 includes both a command and a service module, without the addition of a lunar module. Because of this, they launch from a smaller Saturn 1B rocket. Compared to the Gemini, the flight is much smoother. The Apollo 7 will include the first live television broadcast from space, and it also allows the 3 astronauts the luxury of having hot meals. Yet, issues do arise. One issue is with Schirra, who has already decided to retire from NASA after this flight. The astronauts also all develop head colds and generally grow quite irritable. At one point, they refuse to switch on for a planned broadcast. When preparing to return to Earth, they opt to keep their helmets off so as to equalize the pressure in their sinuses against the wishes of mission control. It is referred to as a mutiny. The flight lasts for 10 days and 20 hours and orbits the Earth 163 times. It is longer than all the Soviet space missions combined. Wally Schirra is the only astronaut to have flown on Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo flights. He will pursue other ventures after NASA, while Eisel and Cunningham will never go to space again, allegedly for insubordination. For Schirra, he felt that NASA had lost its way. Competing with Apollo in the Soviet Union's own Zond program, a satellite, Zond 3, photographed the moon on July 20th, 1965. Zond 5, on September 18th, 68, went into lunar orbit. It is followed by Zond 6 on November 17th. The Soviets are next talking about sending man not to the moon's surface, but only around it in orbit. The race is on. NASA decides that Apollo 8, set to orbit the moon, will launch before the Soviets can follow with another Zond. Apollo 8 will not land a man on the moon, but it will take him to it. December 21st, 1968, 7:50 a.m. Instead, NASA decides to push Apollo 8 even further than originally intended, with less time to prepare, and to send it around the moon and back. Since the lunar module is not yet ready for testing, only a service and command module will embark. Commanding Apollo 8 is Frank Borman, from Gemini 7. Command Module Pilot James Lovell Jr. from Gemini 7 and 12, and Lunar Module Pilot William Anders. Apollo 8 will launch and then go into Earth orbit. The third stage boosters will launch Apollo 8 from there into trans-lunar orbit, which will send it circling the Moon. After orbiting the Moon, boosters will launch it back towards Earth. The patch for Apollo 8 reflects this, a figure 8 that wraps around both Earth and the Moon. 2 hours and 27 minutes into their journey, Apollo 8 is a go for translunar insertion. The upper stage rocket fires, and Apollo 8 becomes the first spacecraft to leave Earth orbit. 5 hours after launch, the SIVB booster is let go, and it floats into orbit around the Sun, where it will remain well into 2015. The Apollo 8 crew sends back live television footage that very next day of the planet Earth. The first ever seen from outer space. They are 50,000 miles from home, a home that is no more than a very small shape seen through the viewport. After flying for 55 hours, Apollo 8 enters the equigravisphere, where the gravitational pulls of both Earth and the Moon meet halfway. 14 hours later, they enter lunar orbit, after a tense 4-minute ignition that, if it fails, can fling them past the Moon itself. The Apollo 8 successfully enters orbit around the Moon. They send back more televised images, this time of the Moon's cratered surface. On their 9th orbit around the Moon, on Christmas Eve, the crew begin their second televised transmission, sending more images of the Moon.
Right, here's a series of cracks or faults across the middle of the Mare. They drop down in about 3 steps to the south. The parallel fault pattern to the north has a drop down in the center. I hope that all of you back on Earth can see what we mean when we say it's a rather foreboding horizon, a rather stark and unappetizing looking place. We're now going over approaching one of our future landing sites, selected in this smooth region to call the Sea of Tranquility. Smooth in order to make it easy for the initial landing attempts, in order to preclude having to dodge mountains. Now you can see the long shadows of the lunar sunrise. We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you.
Borman, Anders, and Lovell have a message for viewers in the world below. A reading from the book of Genesis.
We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
The last obstacle facing the Apollo 8 crew is trans-Earth injection, performed from behind the moon. The crew will need their boosters to fire at just the right moment and bring them back towards Earth. The rockets will have to burn for just over 5 minutes to successfully send them on their way home. A failure will leave them stranded in lunar orbit. Mission Control waits, with bated breath, for word from the astronauts. The Apollo 8 splashes down 6 days after launch on December 27th. They have shown NASA, America, and the entire world that man can reach the moon. There is only 1 year left before he must walk on the distant surface of the moon and thus honor the wishes of our fallen president. Much is riding on the shoulders of NASA and its astronauts. Apollo 11, in which man will walk on the moon, is dependent upon the success of Apollo 9 and 10, both of which will test the lunar module. On January 14, 1969, Soviet spacecraft Soyuz 4 and Soyuz 5 completely interlock and transfer cosmonauts from one to the other. The two ships are joined for 4 hours and 35 minutes. The Soviets claim that the two ships combine to form the first space station. When an American spy satellite discovers the Russians' next step, the massive N-1 rocket, NASA is forced to scramble even more. Larger than a Titan, there's a very real possibility that the N-1 can launch a man to the moon before Apollo 11 has the chance. What's more, the Soviets' tendency to perform in secret gives them a covert advantage. Fortunately for the American space program, the Russians' N-1's first unmanned test flight fails in a fiery explosion before reaching space. March 3, 1969, 11 a.m. When Apollo 9 takes off, it boasts Commander James McDivitt from Gemini 4, Command Module Pilot David Scott from Gemini 8, and Lunar Module Pilot Russell Schweickart. These 3 astronauts are the first to test the spider-like lunar module in space. Since the lunar module requires communication between 2 modules, the astronauts are able to once more name their own craft. They settle on Spider for the lunar module and Gumdrop for the command module. With the lunar module's inclusion, there are new things to be tested and tried. A new spacesuit with its own self-contained life support system, as well as the Spider's flight capabilities. The lunar module is the first spacecraft designed to not make it back to Earth. Its materials are designed for the cold of space and not for the heat of the atmosphere and re-entry. The lunar module is constructed in 2 parts. The descent stage is the lower half with the spider-like legs. It cradles the ascent stage, the actual craft itself within. After McDivitt and Schweickart board Spider, they separate from Gumdrop to test Spider's capabilities in flying. The 10-day flight is a success. Apollo 10, however, will test the lunar module and the astronauts' mettle even further. May 18, 1969, 12:49 p.m. With just under 7 months before man sets foot on the moon, it is crucial that Apollo 10 succeed. This 8-day flight will feature all 3 Apollo modules and perform everything but an actual landing on the lunar surface. Much rides on Commander Thomas Stafford from Gemini 6A and 9A, Command Module Pilot John Young, Gemini 3 and 10, and Lunar Module Pilot Eugene Cernan of Gemini 9A. They christened the Command Module Charlie Brown and the Lunar Module Snoopy, after the boy and his dog from cartoonist Charles Schulz's Peanuts comic strip. Charlie Brown and Snoopy will prove pivotal in a moon landing, and like the Peanuts cartoons, Apollo 10 will be broadcast via color television. 3 hours into the flight, Apollo 10 transmits colored TV images from space. They will broadcast for 5 hours and 52 minutes at different intervals throughout the entire flight to the throngs of humanity below. The 5th day in, at which point Apollo 10 achieves lunar orbit, lunar module Snoopy, bearing Stafford and Cernan, descends towards the moon's surface. It is breathtaking. Less than 47,000 feet above the craggy, barren surface, the two astronauts are the closest man has come to the moon. They survey the Sea of Tranquility, the designated landing zone for Apollo 11. When it is time for the ascent stage to disengage from the descent, something happens. The ascent stage starts to spin out of control. Cernan and Stafford curse while trying to regain control. Stafford had reset the controls in the ship's computer, not realizing that Cernan already had done so. Snoopy's systems became confused and went to the primary guidance system. The pair switch it back to the abort guidance system, and Snoopy is on his way to rendezvous with Charlie Brown. It could have been disastrous. The crew has now tested the systems, and with mission control, it has experienced an entire dress rehearsal. And now, on to Apollo 11 and the moon itself. July 16th, 1969, 9:32 a.m. This is the day that man will reach the moon. If the Apollo 11 crew succeeds, America will win the space race to the lunar surface and make President Kennedy's dream a reality. The astronauts christen Apollo 11 the Columbia, after the Columbiad, the bullet-like spacecraft from Jules Verne's From the Earth to the Moon. The lunar module, in honor of the national bird, is named Eagle. As Commander Neil Armstrong, Command Module Pilot Michael Collins, and Lunar Module Pilot Buzz Aldrin sit in the cockpit of Columbia, they hold pieces of history and honor with them. Armstrong carries both a piece of wood and fabric from the Wright brothers' 1903 airplane and a diamond-studded astronaut badge given to Deke Slayton by the Apollo 1 widows. Both the world's first pilots and Apollo's fallen astronauts have a presence on this historical voyage. The world watches from the edges of their seats as, at the Kennedy Space Center, the Saturn V rocket bearing Apollo 11 ignites and lifts off. The Earth itself shakes as the power of the Saturn V propels the three men into the heavens. 2.5 hours later, after leaving Earth, the escape velocity begins. Apollo 11 heads for the moon. 100 hours later, from lunar orbit, the Eagle undocks from the Columbia. Armstrong and Aldrin prepare for their descent.
Roger, Eagle's undocked. Roger, how does it look? The Eagle has wings. Roger. Looking good.
Present in mission control and witness to this is a who's who of space dignitaries.
This is Apollo Control at 101 hours, 54 minutes. We're now about 20 minutes, 45 seconds from reacquiring the command module on the 14th revolution. The time until the ignition for the powered descent is 38 minutes, 55 seconds. Here in Mission Control, people still standing and waiting. I believe back in the viewing room, we probably have one of the largest assemblages of space officials that we've ever seen in one place.
The mood is tense as Columbia and Eagle momentarily travel beyond radio range.
It's grown quite quiet here in Mission Control. A few moments ago, Flight Director Gene Kranz requested that everyone sit down, get prepared for events that are coming, and he closed with the remark, "Good luck to all of you." Here on the front of our display boards, we have a number of big plot boards which will be used to keep track of the burn progress. Among the more important of those is one which will show the performance of the onboard guidance systems, both the primary and the backup guidance system, and compare the guidance systems with the manned spaceflight network tracking. These displays, by the time this is all over, will look a good deal like a combination Christmas tree, 4th of July.
With communication reestablished, an eagle hovering over the moon's rocky surface, Armstrong and Aldrin are given the go to descend. But then there is a problem.
At the Earth, right out our front window. Houston, you looking at our Delta 8?
It looks good, Flight. Looks good. Is he accepting its guidance?
The 1202. 1202.
The lunar module computer is overwhelmed by the influx of data, causing the 1202 error. Mission Control's computer experts determine a go is still in order. Another 1202 warning goes off, but Aldrin and Armstrong maintain their descent. Soon, they are a go for landing. As Neil Armstrong pilots Eagle in for a landing, both men notice what may be a fatal misstep. They overshoot their intended landing spot in the Sea of Tranquility and are now headed towards a very large crater. With their fuel running low, it will take Armstrong's prowess to safely land. Armstrong is forced to take a gamble. He burns up some depleting fuel reserves in the right bank of boosters, clearing the rocky surface below, and finds a safer, more level area to land. The fuel is diminishing as the astronauts head to the moon's surface slowly. Will it hold out? Mission Control erupts into applause when Neil comes back on. Aldrin and Armstrong prepare Eagle for an emergency liftoff as a contingency, and they eat a meal. They're supposed to take a sleep period, but they opt to delay that. They have a moon to discover. Sleep can wait. History cannot. Neil Armstrong lowers the ladder to the moon's surface. Television cameras broadcast his walk to the entire world at home.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
These words are more than just an answer to President John F. Kennedy's challenge to reach the moon. They are words that will be forever emblazoned as a marker of mankind's achievement, proving our ability to overcome seeming impossibilities to make dreams come true, even when challenged against a backdrop of strife, war, and tension. But for now, Aldrin and Armstrong have experiments to conduct and observations to make. Samples are collected, photographs are taken, and the lunar surface is tested. After 2¼ hours, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong re-enter the lunar module Eagle for some much-needed sleep. They do make time for a phone call at 11:49 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. President Richard Nixon calls them from the Oval Office.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made from the White House. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you have done. For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. And for people all over the world, I am sure that they too join with Americans in recognizing what an immense feat this is. Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world. And as you talk to us from the Sea of Tranquility, it inspires us to redouble our efforts to bring peace and tranquility to Earth. For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one. One in their pride in what you have done, and one in our prayers that you will return safely to Earth.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great honor and privilege for us to be here representing not only the United States, but men of peace of all nations, and with interest and a curiosity and with a vision for the future. Honor for us to be able to participate here today.
And thank you very much, and I look forward, all of us look forward to seeing you on the Hornet on Thursday.
Look forward to that very much, sir.
President Nixon's call must have been a great relief for the Commander-in-Chief. In the event that Aldrin and Armstrong were stranded on the moon, the country's leader had to be prepared to speak words of comfort to the American people. 21 hours after their landing on the moon, Eagle ascends to meet up with Collins in the command module. With all three astronauts reunited within the Columbia, they speed down into the atmosphere at a speed of 36,194 feet per second and splash down in the Pacific Ocean. Collins, Armstrong, and Aldrin arrive on a very different Earth from the one they'd left 8 days earlier. This new Earth has witnessed man walking on the moon. The possibilities are now limitless.